It feels absolutely great and at the same time intimidating to be here, because I'm absolutely convinced by experience that you know much more about the things that I'm going to do than I know about them myself. And you surely also will have views and questions which I don't have any answers to. So that's at least two good reasons to be intimidated. But when Michael and I discussed the idea of today in the first place, it was before, as Michael said a bit earlier, it was before the Macondo well. Times are very different for BP now. But we hold our commitment, as you mentioned earlier, Michael, and here we are, as we planned. Now, I've spent the past months very focused on BP's response to the Macondo incident, and it was about sleeves rolled up, feet on the ground, working in the trenches in the Gulf of Mexico. It's been quite physical and an emotional time, trying to share the elements of our response out there. Having been, and to a large extent, still being in that position, I hope you will understand if today I address my subject from a slightly different angle and be a little more analytical and from a little more analytical perspective, if that makes sense. We can go to the trenches maybe at the occasion of one or two questions. The theme I intend to cover today gravitate around the question of corporate brand management. This means sharing some of our experiences of what corporate brand management means in BP, how the BP brand relates to the other master brands and the product brands that we have, how different levels of brands can help or harm each other, and finally, how all this live through crisis, and perhaps some of what we don't know before such times come. So, enough said as a matter of introduction, but what I'd like to do is maybe start as a quick remember about BP. We are a global energy company. We're a major provider of a diverse energy mix that combines oil, gas, wind, solar, and biofuels, and each of these activities have reached comparative global scale. It is 80,000 BP people working in over 100 countries, and to give a sense of scale, it is 3 or 4 times the same level of jobs that we support indirectly. As I was saying, BP's presence is truly global. We operate across all elements, geographies, weathers, and cultures, and we have a role to play in each individual location, as well as to link this location and what we do and what they do to each other, if only physically, through the movement of goods. Each of our activities has to stand for and mean something clear, and also be guided and represented by principles, values, descriptors, and personality. All of this and more is the brand, which is the company's most valuable asset. In BP, the representation brand of our corporate brand is the Helios at the top of this chart. As you will see here, we also are privileged to count a hierarchy of strong and well-known master and product brands. They all stand for clear and differentiated contributions and benefits to society, our partners and customers. This is a multiple and incredibly inspiring portfolio of brands. More on this later. So back to the corporate brand, what about it? Well, this is the whole company, and I will come back a bit later more specifically to some of the elements of the brand. But for now, I believe the most thing I would share with you is that the most important thing for a corporation and its brand is to be clear on what it is here to do, clear about its role. In the case of BP, it starts from society's need for heat, light, and mobility. All of this requires energy. But we believe that it doesn't require any energy. To us, it is about secure energy, it is about environmentally responsible and also affordable energy. Being able to contribute at the center of these needs that are arguably conflicting in many ways to each other is what we actually strive to do day after day. It is how we see our role and why society should ultimately benefit from our existence. Now, corporate brand management is nothing more and nothing less, I believe, than ensuring that we live up to this mission and share this mission with society in ways which are, on one hand, contributive to them, but also, on the other hand, be as clear, accessible, and transparent as possible. For a company like BP, it entails, of course, a major B2G dimension. Having talked about B2G, our customer-facing businesses now are mainly the space for the master and product brands. Given the span of energy applications and BP's contribution to this, we have activities and brands operating across the three principal marketing models of retail, FMCG, and B2B. The interesting dynamics, even a question here, is how these brands and business models on agendas can differ from corporate brand objectives in the day-to-day execution. In BP, we believe that as society, our partners and customers can be better supported and served through proximity and partnerships. This is why a large space is left to our brands and businesses in their own role and their own area of contribution. As a group and through our brands, we of course share the fundamentals, and this is our core role and our core values. But beyond this, the brands, and in particular some of the world-class heritage brands that we have, should retain large autonomy, and this is reflected in the visual linkages that you can see here. As you see, the associations are noticeable, consistent, but they reflect a clear space between the corporate brand and the master and product brands. So more a soft association and endorsement than anything more. Now, striking the balance between more or less linkage is a permanent question. Because in good times, the positive equity flow is real. The corporate brand, BP in this case, provides its global dimension, perspectives on policy, extensive technology and environmental credential. In turn, the master brand, Aral here, provides market leadership, its sheer quality, the practical projection of technology through advanced products, and relationships in millions, day after day. In good times, there is probably a fairly clear case for more linkages than less linkages, as long as more doesn't lose the clarity of any of the involved brands' position. That was the good times. And until the 20th April of this year, the PB brand and its corporate and product expressions were quite often recognized rather favorably in our sector. Looking at this, it's been a very rewarding job, but it's amazing how quickly things can change. Who laughed? On the 20th of April, the tragic accident we all know about occurred in the Gulf of Mexico. It dramatically cost the lives of 11 people and started one of the main spills in history. My purpose today is not about discussing the events, nor the deep emotions they engender. If you allow me, I'll remain focused on the brand and its active management. But on this, my first comment is one of most irrelevance of what we spend so much time working on, which are the visible elements of a brand and the technique we use to actually manage the brand. So what does brand management mean then in such times? Actually, very little, because it hardly matters. It hardly matters. What is important at the end of the day is what a brand really means. It is the company and the brand's role, the values, the behaviors, the relationship, as opposed to the mechanics of a logo, of a name, of an advertising. Because what people do, and you might and probably have the same experience in times of crisis, is that they go back to what they are fundamentally and what they know to do, hardly invent anything else. So what BP did without thinking about branding, and it is a source of deep emotion and pride for me, is actually, it was from start to end, true to its brand, very true to its brand, without even considering the respective accountabilities of what happened and the consequences that it would mean. BP took responsibility immediately, stepped up to provide as much assistance as possible to those impacted, and to gather an unprecedented response as quickly as possible. People in BP, starting with our CEO, committed themselves beyond imagination. I was there. I can talk a bit about this. I never thought I would see a brand live so deeply. But that, I think, what tells me what a brand is. There was, of course, an element of small brand. But as I said, it was a small element, but an important one that I'd like to share with you. And that's the element of small brand management and the response in that particular area. And you can see here what we did in that particular space. Firstly, we stopped BP advertising globally. Secondly, we only continued non-BP advertising within the portfolio as appropriate. Thirdly, we initiated crisis communication in appropriate market very rapidly. We then focused communication on exclusively, and I will come back to this later, exclusively providing information and support. To this intent, we established 7 information communications pillars. We of course deployed sufficient information and support so that we had a chance to be heard, and we also deployed significant social media support. And finally, we kept our tone of voice focused on facts, relationships, and again, helping whoever needed to be helped. But let me show you a bit how this manifested. And what I'd like to do is, just as a matter of contrast, play in this room advertising of BP before the incident and advertising of BP during the response.
This country definitely needs to focus on other ways to get energy.
We should be looking closer to home. We have oil on our shores.
Natural gas can be a part of the solution.
I think we need to work on wind resources.
They ought to be carefully mapping every conceivable alternative.
There is an endless opportunity right here.
Relying on one source of energy is a luxury that we don't have anymore.
The most obvious common sense solution is that we need to look for other forms of energy.
Solar power and wind power.
Sensible use of oil and natural gas.
Diversity gives us a lot more power.
Diversity is the key.
The energy mix of the future is going to be everything.
There's oil out there we've got to capture. My job is to hunt it down. I'm Fred Lamont, and I'm in charge of BP's efforts to remove oil from these waters. BP has taken full responsibility for the cleanup, and that includes keeping you informed. You may have heard that oil is no longer flowing into the Gulf, but our spotter planes and helicopters will keep searching for any oil. We use satellite images, infrared and thermal photography to map and target the oil. We're finding less oil every day, but we've still got thousands of vessels ready to clean it up. Local shrimp and fishing boats organized into task forces and strike teams, plus specialized skimmers from around the world. We've skimmed over 35 million gallons of oil-water mixture and removed millions more with other methods. I grew up on the Gulf Coast, and I love these waters. As long as there's oil out there that could make it ashore, I'm going to do everything I can to stop it. BP's commitment is that we will see this through, and we'll be here as long as it takes to clean up the Gulf.
They're fishermen, they're shrimpers, they're laborers, they're deckhands, they're people who work in restaurants. These are the people of the Gulf Coast who need our help.
I'm Darrell Willis. I oversee BP's claims process on the Gulf Coast.
BP has got to make things right, and that's why we're here. Part of that responsibility is letting you know what we're doing to make it right. We're replacing the lost income for fishermen, small businessmen, and others who aren't able to work until the spill is cleaned up.
Our claims line is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. People can call or go online, and 900 people are here to help them file their claims and get their checks. Working with the government, we're already paying tens of thousands of claims. We've agreed to create a $20 billion claims fund, administered independently, and it's at no cost to taxpayers.
I was born and raised in Louisiana. I volunteered for this assignment because this is my home. I'll be here in the Gulf as long as it takes to make this right.
So of course, a slight difference between the two expressions, but you know, they're all sort of fairly wholehearted. What I'd just like to spend a minute on, we've just seen some television and YouTube expressions, is actually come back to this little list that I was sharing with you that we did, these 7 or 8 things that we were talking about. And just on the print ad, if we move back to the print ads as they were on the screen, if we could, is just try to recognize the few. The first one on the left-hand side, as you will see, is actually the framework of this and the objective of this, which is making it right and talking into the 7 areas where actions had to be taken and clarity had to be provided on how we would attempt to contribute to doing so. On the right-hand side, you would actually see a lot of somewhat practical information on how to reach out and find the support that people would need, but also to understand the activities. And a large amount of these ads would actually, or the majority of these ads or information advertisement, as we call them, would be actually focused to provide direct access to support information and help. And that's actually the thrust of what we did, which is to move from what people would consider in normal terms is actually reputation or image announcement communication to very practical, very informative and very supportive type of communication. So a very, very different exercise. But you know, having said this, all of this is all very good, but I'd like to put a second relativity in the same way that I did a bit earlier on saying the brand mechanics are quite important, but, and the relativity is that actually nothing of what you say in those times can compete with the subsurface ROV camera, which is showing 24/7 on all screens, gushing oil into the Gulf, and also some images and realities of people being impacted or birds being impacted, etc. As committed and without boundaries as our efforts were, there was little way we could get close to being either heard, little way we could get any credit at all. Anyway. Now, what about the future? Well, that leaves us with a massive task in hand. The BP brand has been tarnished. You've seen on the screen a few examples of this. Yesterday, as an example, Interbrand released the annual league table of the world's most valuable brands. In 2009, BP was ranked 83rd in the global ranking. For the first time ever, the 2010 results showed BP falling out of that ranking, and there are some other manifestations of this. So among other challenges, and as complex that this is, we still need to actually work quite hard on all components of the brand. And I've put here on the screen a few to be considered. And you will recognize in a way the cascade of these elements here. It's not necessarily, but the big question, it's not necessarily that what we have is bad. It is actually, and the questions we have to ask ourselves is actually, how can we learn from what has happened and look not only to be better, but to be as good as possible? And these are the questions and the task at hand. So among these questions, which I'd like to share with you, has the role of BP changed, and also its positioning, i.e. how do we do things? Have our values been strong enough to guide light? Should we change or evolve some of the brand identity components to represent the learning and the change? Are we humble and listening enough? These are the few questions that are in hands. Some of you might expect answers on this from me. I'm sorry, I don't have any, for the very reason indicated before. Was it bad? And how can you get better or as good as you could? Because at the end, BP has a very strong brand in many respects. And let me be a bit personal and passionate a second here. BP is a wonderful brand. A tragic accident happened, and we have taken responsibility. Again, did it mean our brand and what it represents was bad? Does it mean that what many people in the world respected and valued before was bad? I'll leave you to consider this and share the dilemma that we do all share here. And also to consider maybe a last point as well. A brand belongs to people. And a brand like BP belongs to all those who are associated with it in any way. In a crisis like this one, more than ever, there are many stakeholders and their interests are very diverse. So, do we know how to live our brands in a way that satisfy all of them? No, we don't. But I can assure you of one thing. We are going to continue trying as hard as we can to do so and get it right. Now, as a matter of conclusion, let me gather just a few learning I took during this time, and perhaps a few tips from what was said before. Firstly, build the brand in calm times. It is your most fundamental driver and asset in difficult times, internally and externally. Secondly, stay calm. Manage the time and let the time factor play its role. Thirdly, consider most of the options in a fact-based way. Emotions is very strong in such situations. And finally, just reversing what I said, stay true to what the brand is and to who you are. I came here to honor a commitment, Michael. Thank you for the opportunity. I came here to share a passion for this brand. Help it, please. It needs your belief, it needs your support, and it needs your love. Thank you.